The 20th century was an interesting and crucial period of time that changed and shaped our actual economic, political, and military systems. These changes were the result of the devastating global conflicts between the world's superpowers and the economic and political crisis that emerged after them. In this video, we will explain to you, in a quick and brief way, the most outstanding characters and events that took place all across America, Asia, and Europe.
In America, in 1902, Theodore Roosevelt became President of the United States. Theodore Roosevelt was an American politician who participated in the construction of the Panama Canal in 1903, a pathway that improved commerce across the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. Now, talking about Mexico, we have the Mexican Revolution, a movement triggered by the creation of the San Luis Plan in 1910, written by Francisco Madero, Mexican politician that overthrew Porfirio Diaz and caused his resignation from presidency in 1911. But shortly after he became president, Madero was assassinated by Victoriano Huerta, a military who became president in 1913 after betraying Madero and establishing a military regime. In Europe, the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, armed conflict between the Russian and the Japanese Empire over territory of Manchuria, ended with a Japanese victory and because of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, responsible of the massive killing of peaceful Protestants in the Bloody Sunday. Due to its failure, this movement caused the Russian Revolution, two movements that overthrew Nicholas II and created two political parties, the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. This last one was led by Vladimir Lenin, politician that created the April Thesis and founded the Russian Communist Party. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, in 1914, the heir to the Austrian throne, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian. This is considered a cause of the First World War, along with the surge of totalitarian states. One of the most recognized totalitarian regimes is Benito Mussolini's, after being named Prime Minister in 1922. He was an Italian military that established a fascist regime in Italy and created a powerful alliance with Germany during the Second World War.
But in China, the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 was a Chinese uprising in an attempt to expel the spreading of Western culture's influence. On the other hand, we have the different British interventions in Asia. First, the Anglo-Japanese alliance in 1902 between Great Britain and Japan established protection of their interests in Korea and China. In 1917, British troops captured Baghdad and Jerusalem as a mobilization strategy for First World War in an incredibly peaceful and respectful way. And the third one, after World War I ended, Palestine was put under British rule in 1920 as a decision of the League of Nations after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Regarding in India, a non-cooperation movement of 1920 against the British was proposed by Mahatma Gandhi, an Indian lawyer that was recognized for his non-violent strategies in the Indian independence. Also, two crucial characters that participated in the Vietnam War were Ngo Dinh Diem, a Vietnamese politician known for the creation of the South Vietnam and his anti-communist ideology, and Le Duan, a Vietnamese politician recognized for unifying Vietnam after the Vietnam War.
But as years went by, things after World War I started to get worse. Everyone knew another war was coming. All started when the German-Soviet Pact was signed between Hitler, Führer of Nazi Germany, and Stalin, governor of the USSR, both with totalitarian regimes. This led to the German invasion of Poland, event that triggered the World War II. In 1941, the United States came to the war after the Japanese attack to Pearl Harbor, causing the declaration of war to Japan by the US. In 1943, close to the end of the war, German army surrendered at Stalingrad, ignoring commands of Hitler. But that was not it. Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Roosevelt, President in command of the USA, and Stalin decided the future of Japan and agreed to throw the first atomic bomb, destroying Hiroshima City, marking the end of World War II. But not everything was in favor of weapons and destruction. There was also amazing people like Irina Sendler, the Varsovian angel that saved 2,500 Jews in the Holocaust, or Walt Disney, that although he helped US with the propaganda for the war, he gave the world a magical world full of characters that gave hope, fun, and show us to believe, imagine, have illusions, and dream, and to achieve them with faith, hope, and a bit of fairy dust.
After World War II, more conflicts started to appear. One of the most important was the Cold War, with the Berlin Airlift where Western allies sent aid to West Berlin, or at the end, when the Berlin Wall was built. And of course, the creation of the UN in 1946. But that was not in the other Asian countries. Close to the end of the Cold War in 1949, Mao Zedong declares the People's Republic of China, after years fighting the nationalists. The Palestine liberation after the separation of the Arab groups, when also Golda Meir finished the culmination of the Israeli state. or in Vietnam with Vietnam's War, a devastating event led by Ho Chi Minh, President of Vietnam, where USA and Vietnamese people were fighting against the Japanese, and also the character Ahmet Sukarno, that proclaimed Indonesia's independence. Meanwhile, all the most important events that happened in the world, in Mexico, the President Lázaro Cárdenas, which ended with the Maximato, proclaimed the oil expropriation.
Wars and conflicts seem to be in a never-ending cycle. Even in the early 1970s, conflicts around the world were going on, being caused by whether religious purposes such as the Yom Kippur War, where Egyptians attacked Israel to recover territory in 1973, and the Sino-Indian War, a conflict between China and India in 1987. But war wasn't over. We can still observe how Taliban and Al-Qaeda Muslim terrorist groups, which started to set up in 1997, still use violence and take lives of innocent people. But not all of it during 1970 and 2000 was all war. Many advances in technology and change within each nation were happening. The world seemed to be closer to peace than to war. The first one being how Disney World opened its gates in 1971, bringing happiness to the US. Treaties were made to maintain peace and avoid bigger conflicts such as the two world wars. The Soviet Union in 1987, when Mikhail Gorbachev was the Soviet Union's first president, who led at the end of the Cold War, signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which concluded nuclear conflicts between the US and the Soviet Union. And in 1992, China and the Non-Proliferation, which prohibit any nuclear-related weapon.
Changes in politics that can be seen nowadays, whether it was bad like the Watergate scandal in 1972 involving President Nixon, which changed how people saw the government since it wasn't as trustworthy as it seemed like in Mexico, José López Portillo, and the dissolution in the Soviet Union which gave birth to Russia, and good changes such as how women were gaining a vote, and in all parts of the world, such as Rigoberta Menchú in Guatemala, Song Ching-li in China, Indira Gandhi in India, and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, because she was the first woman to become prime minister. Similar thing happened in Pakistan when Pakistan's president airplane was bombed in 1988. The first woman became prime minister and led the country. Equality was rising with the help of the Equal Rights Amendments in 1972 in the US and the projection of Zhang Yimou, famous Chinese filmmaker, of women being humans rather than objects.
But not only equality but also advances in technology were emerging. The outcomes of the invention of Microsoft in 1975 and Apple in 1976 by Steve Jobs are still present. As you can see, not all of it was war and conflict. Even the conflicts from the Cold War were ending by the years 1918 with the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 and the unification of Germany a year later in 1990. War was almost over. Peace was rising and a future was closer. You could even say that Juan Pablo II was smiling at that time.
We can conclude that events from the 20th century shaped almost everything about the 21st century. From the World War I to the invention of Apple, there are hundreds of ideas and actions that are still affecting us as we speak. For example, the scandal in the White House contributed in how people saw and still see the government, how women gained recognition, and how and why nations' relationships are the way they are. How terrorist groups are still active, like ISIS with the terrorist attacks to Brussels and Paris, and so on. The 20th century was both a curse and a miracle for the 21st one. However, it's important to know how the events were and how they did affect us so we can understand our present.